This morning in North Carolina, wheels are spinning. Determination is winning. A passion is now a thriving business, and it shows no signs of slowing down. How? The power of a conversation, like the one Clint Spiegel had with First Horizon Bank about starting a bike wheel manufacturing facility in Asheville. Now it's not just talk, it's rubber meets road. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/Clint. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.
What if I told you that it was estimated that 4% of the world's population played a single sport? What if that sport had just started gaining momentum in the United States? Would you be interested? Apple certainly is. Today we are talking about football. We talk the United, the World Cup, and the insane valuations that these sports are generating here in the US. Our guest is Matt Stigall, who helped bring MLS to Atlanta with a simple petition. Well, the petition may have been simple, but the journey was not. All that and more today on the Marketing Madmen podcast.
They say marketing is a madman's game. So now we turn it over to the Marketing Madmen with Nick Constantino and Trip Job.
Happy Saturday. Welcome to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino of 680 The Fan and the Atlanta Braves Radio Network, which is appropriate today as we continue our theme on not only marketing, but we've talked a little bit at times about how sports entertainment, and all ties in, and so many wonderful opportunities to for businesses to look at using sports in their overall marketing plan. So excited. I know you've got a great guest for us today to dive into those topics.
Yeah, we do indeed, and we're going to leave my comfort zone. I will say, growing up, I grew up in Queens, and there was all concrete. Soccer was not something that was easy to be played on concrete. So I was, or football, if we will. I was not the biggest proponent. I did have an immigrant family from Italy, so it was a passion point in my family, but just not something I completely got behind. But since I moved to Atlanta and really started getting involved and watching the World Cup, it's something that I've gotten more passionate about. So we're going to talk a lot about soccer. We're in that season right now. Everything's about to get started again.
You're even wearing your Atlanta United jersey.
I represent, man. Hey, represent. One of the things that I think is really important is it represents the population of Atlanta really well, right? It's such a diverse population. I always say it's Georgia State, not Georgia. If you look at the population base of Georgia State, it's much more representative of who Atlanta is. But anyway, so we're about to get the season started. You have baseball, spring training, all these things are happening. All the seasons are about to start. Atlanta United, believe it or not, started already. I mean, the season is that long in February. That season started, and they won, which is a good thing. But when we talk about sports and soccer, we're going to talk about the valuations. We're going to talk about how to market the right way. But we're also going to get into some details of, how does a team get a startup in a city like Atlanta? How does that process happen? So I'm excited about it. We're going to introduce here Matt Stigall, the owner of Growth Factor Agency. Matt's been very involved in the United and several other things with soccer. But Matt, why don't you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about how you got where you are?
Yeah, so I have basically grown up in the Atlanta area, and I'm a diehard Atlanta sports fan with every team, including Georgia Tech. I like to point out that Georgia's not an Atlanta team, or UGA at least, and so, Georgia Tech is that home team for me. So really passionate, and I actually grew up not liking soccer, and then gave it a chance, about 15, 20 years ago now, and now, yes, I mean, soccer is probably one of my biggest passions as far as sports, and it's been quite an experience. And even when I was a Georgia Tech student, I worked for the football team there. Got to travel the team, all of that. So it's been sports have been a very big part of my life. Almost visited every baseball stadium in the country. There's a whole checklist I can go to, but I don't want to spend too much time going through it. But sports is definitely one of my biggest passions, and I look to bring that into a lot of other parts of my life.
Yeah, that's great. And what you told me was about how that connects to marketing, and that's another passion is marketing, which is why this is such a good conversation. So, talk a little bit about that. Talk about how marketing ties into that, which will explain your company, and then we can kind of get into some of the nitty gritty about the sports and soccer in general.
Yeah, and so the one thing that always drove me to sports was the passion of the fans, passion of players who literally spend all of their time trying to hone their craft to be the best they can be at their sport. And that passion, I realized, is a parallel into marketing. And in growth marketing, so much of marketing is focused on like getting new customers, retaining those customers, and kind of that churn and burn, that flow. And, it kind of gets exhausting. And what's usually lost in that is finding your most passionate customers, your fans.
Yep.
And so figuring out who your best customers are, why are they your best customers, and figuring out like, okay, you've got 10 to start with. How do we grow that to be 50, 100? What does that mean to your business? How dependent are you?
Yeah, I would say best customers and best target customers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's kind of a uniquely different conversation than just going after a new customer or something like that. So it kind of, I've learned that kind of flips. And when I look at, for instance, in soccer, you've got the supporter section. And I've always noticed that as you get farther away from the supporter section, the passion of the fans kind of starts to drop the farther away you are.
Now, depending on the game, right? It also, so the passion of the fans for the games that matter less is even more amplified the further you go away from the supporter group. For the games that matter, usually everybody's standing up, everyone goes nuts. That passion is contagious. But February, game 1, I mean, you can know who's the fan and who's not.
Yep. Right. And I want to come back to that, but for a minute, Nick kind of said something early on, and we think about it. We think about the NFL. We think about Major League Baseball. And I think a lot of business owners think, well, look, unless I'm a major, Fortune 1000 company, I can't get involved. And I think, whether it's Atlanta United, whether there's, being here in Atlanta, you've got lacrosse, you've got, many other different options. And I think that's one of the neat things that sports does offer. And really where you're going, Matt, is understanding who your customers are and who your targets. And I think there are ways to look at different sports that might fit for a lot of businesses that can't afford to be a Falcons, advertiser or a Braves advertiser.
Yeah, we got rugby. I think there's even a cricket team that's about to start here in Atlanta. You mentioned lacrosse. We still have the Gwinnett Gladiators up in Gwinnett. There's a polo team that plays 2 miles from here. So I mean, there's all these passions, and you go to some of these games and you realize like, okay, I am completely, I don't say ignorant, but it's like completely unknown. Of
we have
the
golf
sport.
tournaments, we got tennis tournaments.
That's a really good thing. Let's not even mentioning pickleball. Let's not even mention by the Budweiser Pickleball League or any of those. The one thing that ties it all together, and you talked about fans, and I think what's so important, brand. The Atlanta Braves are as synonymous of a brand as there is, right? The Atlanta United, the way they stormed in here, I mean, they are the number 2 most valuable team. They exist for 5 years. They built a brand. And one of the things about building those fans is much easier to build fans when you are an established brand. It is much easier to be an established brand when you do market the right way. So all these things kind of come full circle. And I think that is the one thing in sports marketing. It's not just how do you market within sports, it's how do you apply the principles of how these teams market. Social media followings. And look, some do them better than others. One of the things I find fascinating, say what you will about the soccer stars globally, they have the biggest social media followings in the world, and it's not even close. So they have done a better job at attracting a younger audience. So it's really important to say that brand, how important that brand is.
Yeah, and I would say successful brands. And successful doesn't always mean winning, but it's one that you know what you're going to get. You've got investment from the top, and I'll turn to someone like the Pittsburgh Pirates. All right, that's an established brand, right? But if you're in Pittsburgh, how many businesses want to support the Pirates after the last 20 years?
Well,
right, and so
it's only businesses that are in Pittsburgh that need to showcase it.
Exactly. But I mean, I think there's a piece of it where you want to really be established with someone who, whether the new brand or an older brand that understands their customer base and can really, get that passion. Not one that is on a yo-yo. One year they're doing, a lot of things. The next year they're, out of sight, out of mind.
Yeah, when it comes to sports, it's all about hope. You're not going to spend as I've aged, I've realized time is my most valuable asset. Yeah. And so when it comes to, as we mentioned, Georgia Tech, I was the biggest Georgia Tech fan. As we've kind of struggled over the years, I mean, one of the most dangerous things is I've kind of become apathetic to a lot of our games, whether it's basketball or football.
You and everyone else.
Right. Sometimes I don't even know the game's on, and like I'm sitting there, I'm like, I used to, travel to all the away games. And now it's like, oh, a game popped up. Wow. And it's kind of sad at the end of the day. And hopefully, as hope comes back and with new coaches and, and new hope, you start seeing a little bit of that lifeblood come back.
Yeah, we talked about that in our Georgia Tech episode. And I think one of the problems there is that there's so much else going on with the school that's not the primary thing, which is another reason why you don't want to get lost. You don't want to get too clever with what you're doing. It is still about winning.
The Georgia Tech brand is about academics.
Exactly.
I mean, that's the thing. So guess what?
But you don't want to get too lost, right? I think people are starting to get really clever right now, right? Like Welcome to Wrexham is a great example, right? What are they famous for? Are they famous for being a soccer team, or the fact that Ryan Reynolds and Rob McElhenney bought the team and now are doing a show? You talk about Formula One. Yeah, Formula One's huge, but it wasn't until the Netflix show got to America that sport became big. So what is the staying power of something that has those artificial kickers? So I think one of the things that people are going to run into, like you said, you got to win, man. It is still at its core, sport is still, you got to win. I mean, you look at the Cincinnati Bengals are my favorite example. One guy took them from the Bungles to Super Bowls. And the fact that that is capable, and Joe Burrow is just as cool as they come on earth, but the fact that that happened is what's so amazing about sports, that anyone can turn something around. I saw the Milwaukee Bucks just sold their partial owner. They are worth $5 billion. That's worth more than the Denver Broncos from a team. How many people live in Milwaukee? 16 people live in Milwaukee. They have Miller Lite, and now all of a sudden they're selling for billions of dollars, more than the Broncos. I mean, that is insane to think. And I think that unpredictability and that the spur of the moment, it was viral before viral was a thing, is what makes sports so great. And I think the Atlanta United did a really good job of sparking that. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So I do want to say it's what's so amazing about sports, and what's always driven me to sports is how quickly things can change. Right? Yeah. That doesn't happen in the brand world. That does every once in a while, but Apple has been Apple for a long time. You don't get somebody that comes out of nowhere. TikTok is probably the most recent example of a company that just came out of nowhere.
You don't have one or two people that come into a business that often and can immediately change the course of that business. But in sports, it can happen.
Yeah. Your product is dependent on a quarterback, or in basketball, especially a star player. Yeah. And if your success is dependent on the product like that, then it's going to go ebb and flow based off the talent on the field that you put on.
That's a good point. What about soccer? So I saw Josef Martinez just sold his house here. I remember when they started, that was it, and then the fall from grace and how quickly he has disappeared. Is that a usual thing in soccer? Is that this situation? Did he get hurt? What happened? Because that's topical as of right now.
Yeah, so you see a lot of player turnover in soccer. Maybe a little bit more. Atlanta United has had a little bit more in the last few years than typical, but it's basically any team is going to have a lot of that turnover. I mean, even Messi changed from Barcelona to PSG, and you always have those big names, and you're shocked when somebody gets sold for $100 million. And,
oh man, what happened with Ronaldo was one of the craziest things I've ever seen. And,
it's
they violated the contract. Oh my goodness! Yeah. And the amount of money being thrown at these people. I mean,
it's insane.
They must have a strong union. I'll leave it at that. I don't know if they work that same way, but the amount of money these players are able to get.
I don't know about the union, but a thing I want to get to when we come back from the break is supporters, both from how they operate and also how businesses can think about that. So you are listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3, and we'll be right back.
Now back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen. Trip Job and Nick Constantino here with Matt Stigall. And, we were talking, got in a little bit about soccer and how the valuations and everything else is rising to football. But let's talk a little bit. I mean, it's still a young history. Give us a little background of what happened and how Atlanta United came to be. And then I definitely want to dive into this whole supporters concept.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, I grew up really not liking the sport of soccer, and I gave it a chance, but I realized I didn't really have a local team playing at the top level. And so I was like, all right, how do we get an MLS team? And I saw that in Philadelphia, the Sons of Ben kind of create a supporters group in the minds of having a supporters group before a team even existed. And I was like, all right, like if we actually sat there and showed that there's a fan base for the team, then everyone kind of knew Arthur Blank would be the eventual owner years before. But I was like, all right, like maybe we can accelerate the timeline a couple of years or something like that. I get that just a little bit earlier. And so back in 2011, we started the petition, and it literally just involved showing up to, high school soccer tournaments. There was a couple of MLS.
Grassroots.
Yeah, 100% grassroots. Beer festivals. We love going to beer festivals. And we'd have watch parties for MLS Cup and stuff like that. And it really was just attracting the potential most passionate fans already years before the team even existed. And, we'd have maybe 5 people show up sometimes, 20 people show up sometimes, but it started to just grow a little bit more and more. And I always remember in 2014 when they announced the team. We were invited. They kind of, like we had meetings with them, and they invited us to that announcement party. We looked down, and there's a line around the block at like trying to get merchandise and trying to sign up for our supporters group. And that's that moment when I was like, oh, this is real. And, and like I had always talked and like, and like bragged about, and there'd be people who sat there and said a soccer team in Atlanta would fail and I'd have to defend the city. And, we're not that bad of a sports team. And Thrashers left because of the owners, not the fans, and just going through all of that. And eventually it was finally the validation that like, oh, this is real. This is going to happen. And this is way bigger than what any of us expected.
So Atlanta United was what number team when they came in?
I believe it was the 21st.
21st, and now 28, 29?
So started in 2017.
Okay. No, but now in the MLS, there's now how many teams?
Yeah, I believe we're right around 30.
Yeah.
So
and they're popping up everywhere.
I
Those
know.
licenses are going. Charlotte, I think, was the most recent, and they're popping up all
Vegas
over the place.
is on
St.
the works.
Louis.
Yeah.
Yep.
So.
Yeah.
That fan base exists, though. I mean, especially in these immigrant communities, to whatever capacity where these are the primary sports, it exists everywhere. Whether it be a European, whether it be Latin American, I mean, most of the world, this is the preeminent sport. Probably with cricket being the next bastion of Americans not
Or
knowing.
F1 or something. Yep.
Yeah. Well, you talked a little bit before about how some of the teams are just Atlanta teams or other. How would you look at Atlanta United? What is it? Is it an Atlanta team? Is it a Georgia team? How would you think about it?
So, I mean, originally it filled a void in the entire South. It was the first Southern MLS team. And their core is Atlanta. And the timing of it, right after the Atlanta Braves moved out downtown to, right up the block here. And, so they kind of filled that void just at the perfect time. They played into the railroad grassroots, history of Atlanta. And they connected with us, the passionate supporters before the team. So, so that first game, we already had kind of our chants set up. We already had kind of a little bit of a culture set up. And, we were rolling that first game.
Yeah.
And I think everyone who went to those Bobby Dodd games kind of wish we played a game or two every year at Bobby Dodd because that atmosphere was just insane.
Smaller, more intimate. And I remember, I mean, it when you drive around downtown, we're talking downtown for our Alpharetta folks and our Milton folks who don't make it down there often. When you're talking downtown, those flags and those colors fly everywhere. Every neighborhood, East Atlanta, that is the predominant sport that you see people supporting. I think it really did a good job of capitalizing on the foot traffic and the people that were downtown. And it was the first sport to really do that. I'm not saying the Hawks and the Falcons didn't. I'm just saying the nature of Atlanta has changed so much since those teams have come that it was such a good representation of downtown. And I think that part is what helped it go viral. Is it was the first truly for that Atlanta area. And I'll venture to say, I mean, there are plenty of people when you leave Atlanta that are still immigrants, and it fits the diverse in there, but that is Atlanta, and that team did a good job of capitalizing on that. All of my wife's friends, Colombians, Ecuadorians, I mean, they were sold on minute one.
And I think to add to that, Atlanta's a transient city. So as everyone moved here, they brought their NFL team here, their NBA team, their NHL. I remember going to Thrashers games, and there'd be Thrashers fans, but when the Detroit Red Wings came in, they put on their Detroit
the
uniform.
Bruins showed up.
So people would have like their hometown team as they brought, but they didn't have their hometown soccer team. And so that then enabled everyone in Atlanta, no matter where you were from initially, to then come together and be like, this is our team.
And you could still be a fan of your country, because that's important, right? Those countries,
Well,
that is a sport that does a good job of breaking down between national pride and individual teams. So, you're still rooting for Italy or the U.S., but you can still be that fan of the United who brings all those people together.
Yeah, and I worked for a while for an Irish-based company, so there were a lot of, UK expats. So that's how I got turned on to the Premier League. But, everyone could still have their Premier League team and support Atlanta United.
Yep.
That was, I think, the beauty of it.
Or their Italian team. Or their, and then that moment when, so I'm a Tottenham fan, and if Tottenham ever plays Atlanta United, I'm going to do whatever I get to, get a split kit or something, right?
Yeah.
And just that's the one time they might play each other. And, and it would be...
What would the betting line be on that game? +6, +7 for Tottenham. I'm just asking out loud. I mean, again, one of the things we were talking about earlier is just the disparity between the best and the. I can watch NBA. I could watch college. For some reason, sometimes I can even watch high school basketball because I'm shocked a high school kid is 6'9" and can do that. But the difference between, France in the World Cup and like the Atlanta United in February is just so visible. I mean, it's not if you're a casual fan because they're still doing the same things, but just the ability to watch a guy go one-on-one and the way the team works and fluidity and congruent, it's unbelievable. And those guys don't play together that often. No. So it's amazing the instincts and just the difference in it. So, so talk about Terminus Legion. So that's an example. That's the supporter group. That's one of the big ones. Yep. Talk about the Gulch, talk about Game Day, talk about those supporter groups, how many there are, and why that's different than most sports.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what soccer does really great is it puts the most passionate fans in one area. And when you get that, you get a lot of that just organic, just fever. And then not only is it in that one area, it then winds up spreading throughout the entire stadium. And so if you have chants that are easy to know, easy to learn, easy to replicate, that's why the loudest ones are always like the ATL chant, or just one side does Atlanta, the other side does United. It's easier to spread that way. And the next thing you know, you've got 70,000 people all doing the same chant.
And I think, here in Atlanta, I think one of the reasons it did catch on with maybe the more common sports fan is there's a little connection to SEC football and the student section.
Yep.
All right. And so I think there was that piece that probably helped some of the more casual viewers like, oh, yeah, cool. This is like going to a Saturday game at the Grove or at Between the Hedges.
And to that point, maybe with soccer, you might go to the bar or the pub before the game. There is a tailgating culture with the supporters groups, but that then goes back to the tailgating culture of college football, where are we watching a sport or are we having drinks, and then the sport's kind of sometimes secondary to some to some people. So you definitely have a lot of those parallels there.
Yeah. So is there an example of a business that maybe or two that got in pretty early, understood the supporters section, and has really benefited from it from the Atlanta United?
I don't know as far as business, but scarves. What is the purpose of scarves at the end of the day? And I've got probably 150
in Atlanta, especially.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't even put a winter jacket on, let alone a scarf.
But every time a scarf comes out, like I'm buying one, and I'm I'm trying to and so everyone's got their like scarf collection. And then you sit there, and you wear one, and you're like, This isn't comfortable. Like, this sucks.
I can give you a brand because it's for someone we're really familiar with. So our buddies at Heaven Hill Brands, big liquor, one of the only family-owned ones left. A lot of brands, but Luna Azul tequila was one of the first big ones, and it is a very traditional blue agave tequila. It's really good, but $18 a bottle, like great tequila, great margarita tequila. And they one of the first ones, and they signed that deal originally when the season started when no one knew anything about the team and capitalized on the fact that they won. And now you see everywhere official of the Atlanta United, and the brand has grown exponentially. Atlanta is one of their top in the country. So they hitched their ride to the wagon at the exact right time. So one of the problems is that all of a sudden after they win, those prices go up pretty quickly. And now all of a sudden they're making them do the deals in congruence with the Falcons, which makes it a little bit more complicated. Whenever the NFL gets involved, those prices and valuations go higher than you can imagine. But knowing the family and knowing the people of Heaven Hill, Luna Azul is one of the early, really, really big success stories of a brand that was little known, that hitched their ride to United at the exact right time and have grown immensely and have seen some really good success from it.
Well, and sometimes the other is proximity. So I actually went to the new Wild Leap facility right over the yards right there. And, this was a month ago before the season started, and they had already pretty much decked it out. And you can already see that is going to be one of the pregame, postgame, facilities. And so it took them a year, I think, to finally get in there. But it's a case of, all right, they may or may not be officially involved, but they're looking at how the supporters congregate, how often are they going to be there, and they're taking advantage of it. And I think you'll see whether or not, I'm guessing they're going to be successful.
Oh, no, it was just like Elliott Street Pub, with proximity. You went to a game before, after, or if you went there before, after a game, it was packed. But the fire station was right there. It would have to lay on its horn just to get by the people because the people were all over the streets. So.
Yeah, so I've heard a couple interesting things. Let's approach this. A couple interesting things about the game day experience, things I've heard just from the grapevine, and then I want to talk about these team valuations because this has gotten out of control. Yeah. So one of the things I remember, this was early, but they used to give us some tickets to some games. I got to go to the first playoff game, sit in the pit under the stadium and everything. But I remember two things. One, them saying that people at the games do not drink, eat anywhere near as much as they do at Falcons and games like that. The hospitality is almost non-existent, just in the way that the game day is. And I remember walking around to get a beer because I'm at a sporting event, and that's insane to not, and nobody drinks beer. Like the guys, the people that were set up there to give them to you like at a Falcons game, were begging me to stop and get a beer from them, and the Falcons, the line's out the door. So do you think, and that is one of the reasons initially that it was hard to build the teams, because it's just the game day, they weren't spending as much money day of as the more predominant leagues. Has that changed a little bit? Are there now these valuations as they go? Is that a reason these valuations have changed, or is that just they sit the day and they're watching the entire game when they sit down?
I mean, I think the valuations have changed just because it's a younger demographic, and so everyone's valuing future generations at this point. But and the reason why also though that nobody drinks during the game is you don't want to go there and miss the one goal that's scored. And so whether
there's no timeouts. You can't run in between innings and go get a beer, right?
There's got to be a healthy medium, because like a college football game is too long. There's too many times to go get a beer. Yep. And in that instance, like as much as I love hanging on my seat for the next goal, like just being at a sporting event live without a beer in my hand feels so wrong. And I don't know what that says about me, but it just feels so wrong. So there's got to be a healthy medium there. But let's talk about valuations, because this has just come out. Okay, so Trip, just random guess. Pretend you didn't know this. What would you think the average Major League Soccer team is worth at this day and age right now?
I mean, I would have to think it's just in the hundreds of millions. Average 250 maybe.
So there are now, let's call it 30 teams. Yeah. $500 million with teams. Some of them 2-3 years old at most. Okay, the Atlanta United came out as I think the number 2 team behind the LA Galaxy, $800 million. Yeah. For some context, there are professional big 3 sports, big 4 hockey sport. Oh, let's not even get into hockey, but baseball, football, and basketball teams that sold for less than that, less than 10 years ago. And MLS is already worth that amount of money. So the valuations have gone crazy. I don't think anybody that doesn't know the industry would be able to guess that those sky-high valuations. The TV deals are unique. One of the things I was always told, baseball's completely for radio, football's completely for TV, soccer's completely for the internet. These are streaming kids that are streaming games. Well, that was validated.
That explains the Apple deal.
That was validated. So let's talk about the Apple deal. So, Matt, I'm curious what you think. It's not something I know enough to speak about. I know that they caught fire with, we mentioned Ted Lasso, and I wonder if that has something to do with it.
Oh, probably.
But
yes.
I mean, and as I've watched every episode, I love the show, but do you think this is good for both the casual fans and the ability to acquire new fans? Because my concern is Apple TV is still very niche. And from what I've read, having really big problems with turnover because they just cannot make enough content, because Apple doesn't do anything at a loss. They're trying to make a profit. And we know from streaming services, you got to be ready to take a loss for a long time. So do you think this is going to benefit consumers that want to watch it, but also people who want to find it for the first time in the discovery? What do you think is going to happen there?
So I think you brought up both points. Where the super fan, I think it benefits. It's, you got a lot more content, higher quality content. You'll be able to watch every game. I mean, it's like all inclusive now. For the casual fan, and I parallel it with the Braves on TBS, the Superstation back in the day. The Braves built a national fan base because they were on national TV every game, and they benefit from that 20 years later. And and so that ease and accessibility for games, and so I was up in Helen, Georgia this past weekend trying to catch the game at a bar. We called 5 different bars and asked, "Hey, do you have Apple TV?" And none of them did. None of them. They didn't even know how to hook it up. And so that right there was you're never going to have those people just at a bar and be like, "Oh, the Atlanta United game is on. Well, let's catch it."
Look, they will. It'll be years of adoption and to figure this stuff out.
Right,
they will, as most sports move over, as Thursday Night Football, as Amazon, as
DirecTV came out. Not all the bars had it, but within a year cycle, they got it.
They'll get it, but I can imagine the frustration of that, and honestly, especially in a town like Helen, which is literally a European village. Like, it just makes sense to be watching a game up there.
So, but, I think the other side is at least they still have the Fox deal, the FS1. So, I mean, you're going to pick up a few games.
Yep.
But it is a transition period.
And even I know we're doing more and more streaming, but if anyone has tried to change one streaming game to another streaming game, it's a process. Where on TV, it's just like a click of the button, the return button. And until they fix that, It is literally like, and when it's
they won't fix it, by the way,
right,
because it's going to
impossible.
all go to different providers, and their sole job is to keep you there. They want to make it so hard to leave Apple TV to go to something else because they want you just consuming. So they will not fix that.
Right,
It's gonna be, until these companies start consolidating and go through this, or somebody comes up with a system that does it for you. The old TiVo model where you can kind of switch around things.
Right, exactly.
They are not going to make it easy for that to happen.
Yeah. And that's the, like with marketing, we're all econs. That's the whole behavioral economics thing, right? And we're all subconscious. To sit there and have to like consciously change the channel is a conscious decision that we're losing with some of this streaming.
Right.
And the impact of that, I do think it's, in the long term, it's really good just because of the financial benefits of it.
It's clout.
Yeah.
Let's call it clout. I mean, for Apple to show that investment, I'm sure that helped the valuations by itself. Apple coming in, even if they got offered less money than Fox, showed the advertisers a sense of this is the
direction
future.
of where they want to go.
This is the future, which I'm sure
we'll subsidize it the first year, and then look, you're going to pay off.
Guys. It was part of the equation. I mean, it's not as important for the NFL when Amazon came in on Thursday Night Football. We knew that was going to happen, but for Apple to invest in Major League Soccer is like this is where this is going. And look, these people they have strategies, right? Yeah. And so let's talk about the strategy. So the World Cup is coming to the U.S.
Oh yes,
Atlanta has been named. My assumption is that if the World Cup was not coming to the U.S., that Apple deal would not have happened as quickly as it did. If this was 20 years down who knows what would have happened. But because all of a sudden this money-making opportunity has now presented itself for the hype behind it. So, two-part question. Before we even talk about Atlanta, does the U.S. have what it takes to actually make a run in 26? I was impressed this year, but it ended in the same BS we always see. Like, you can't win soccer matches by scoring 0 goals or tying. It just does not work that way. Does this team, is this homestand going to be where the United States finally plants its flag and says we're here? Guess.
I mean, there's always that chance, right? That's why we watch the game.
That's a no.
Right.
That's a no. There's no chance.
I think the reality of the answer is there's a 17 or 18-year-old today that we don't know if they can become the next, Mappe or someone like that.
But they know those kids, though. That's why I asked. Those kids, usually those 17-year-olds are picked out at 11 years old that they're going to be those superstars. Right. So I'm wondering, has that hype machine started yet?
Yeah,
are we because look, the World Cup is as big of a thing as it is. I mean, in the U.S., I would probably venture to say March Madness is a bigger thing, just because we're just so fixated on it. But that being said, I can imagine Apple building plans, taking on these rights, knowing the World Cup was coming with some big plans around what we're going to do for the World Cup. So before we get to that, is the U.S. ready? And that's what I'm always curious. That's why I watch, because I'm waiting for that moment. Look, women's soccer figured it out a long time ago. I'm waiting for that moment.
And we're playing an uphill battle when it comes to soccer. And I think one of those reasons is just the way we develop our youth players. But you're also seeing, as you mentioned, the 17 or 18-year-olds, we're having a lot more youth and teenagers being bought up by European or going through MLS academies that we haven't had in the past.
Yeah.
So and our team this year was the youngest team in the World Cup, and so you combine a lot of that. There's hope, and in the sports world,
that's what we want is hope.
And with home field advantage,
I just want to get out of the first round of the knockout. I mean, I just want to get to the second. I just want to get to the second round of the knockout. That's all. I don't need a victory.
I think the quarterfinals are real. I think quarterfinals are real. And
Morocco
then at that point,
Morocco did it. We could do it. That's all. So let's talk about
in our last 3 minutes on this section. I want to hit going back to game day experience. I want to go for the businesses, and so I did a lot of entertaining, and so there's other things you can't support, you can't advertise, you can't be a sponsor, but you can take customers to events. And I mean, I've done the road racing, I've done some unique things, of course, baseball, football, but I think some of the, let's call them secondary sports to the big three, I think there's some unique ways that you create these wonderful experiences. What are some things with the Atlanta United and maybe some of the other properties in Atlanta that can be great ways to to have that game day experience for customers?
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is you have to be authentic. You have to like buy in from the beginning, and if you have those passionate fans, there's a unique opportunity to connect with that passion in those sports, in those little niches that you don't really have anywhere else. And that's where I think, again, rugby and a few of the other teams, alcohol is always one of those sponsors, right?
Yeah.
And it's always, to your point, it might be a smaller brand or something, but that is the unique experience of look, if you're here to have a good time, let's add that
Right. But if I'm going and taking 4 of my customers to a United game, do I want to be there 5 hours early?
Dude, the one thing I'll say, I don't know if you've been there. They have suites that are built into the floor, so you're almost at eye level with the stadium. Right. I've never seen that anywhere else. That's the experience I got to do.
Unique tickets.
I took people down there, and that is an otherworldly experience because. Look, I mean, the field is big. There's not that much going on in like, it's not like when you watch a basketball game, you're too high. You have no idea what's happening. But that level, to see the players on that level coming at the goal is unbelievable. Right. So just in that sense, that unique experience, I think, makes it
Don't just show up to the game is the main thing. There are unique things that you can do. There's pregame activities. There's postgame, I'm sure. Make it a day.
Don't send them in the supporter. If you're trying to get business done, don't send the supporter section. How does that sound? Is that a good tip? Don't send the supporter section if you're trying to get a deal done.
It depends on. In my opinion, like I actually have 2 tickets, and and I've got a son, so usually I bring him. But if not, I have used them for business purposes. Right. I got second level front row, and I think they're the best seats in the entire stadium.
Yeah.
And you can
that's
see
what we have for the Falcons. We are 50-yard line, mezzanine, front row. It's the best seats because you can see the full field.
Yeah, and nobody's
for a
in
field
front
that
of
big.
I can stand up, I can sit, I can do whatever I want. And I'm also right above the supporter section, so I can sit there and point, like, look, like that, and like I know the capos, so I can give them that entire like background and all of that.
That brings passion.
Yeah, and so I think it just depends on, I'll know, okay, if I need to be very casual or very formal or whatever based on the person, but I think tailoring that experience, and you have that in sports, right? You can go for the the high pricey suites, the high pricey, or you can sit in the sports section, have beer thrown on you. Yeah. And so I think that's where it's very unique in how you want to do it.
Experience. I mean, I think that's the
based
key.
On the client. Don't bring someone who's bummed up to the supporter section, get beer poured on them, and don't bring someone who's willing to party down to the stuffy section.
Exactly.
So.
All right. So we'll dive in a little bit more in the last section, and you were listening to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3.
Now back to the Marketing Madmen on Extra 106.3 FM.
Welcome back to the Marketing Madmen. Nick Constantino and Trip Job here with Matt Stigall. And we're going to finish our conversation about soccer and the United, and we're going to finish it with what's most important, and that's the World Cup coming to the U.S. And more importantly, the World Cup coming to Atlanta. And before the break, Matt and I were talking, and just to give some context of how important this is, not only were we selected as one of the cities, but Matt, talk about a little bit more about just how important Atlanta is to this World Cup.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that, over the past 20 years or so, Atlanta has become a global city. And, whether it's the airport, whether it's our sports brands, the Fortune 500 companies, whatever it is, Atlanta has put itself on the world map to be a major city. And, and that's kind of what the Olympics kind of changed the city to help us achieve. And, yeah, when it comes to the 2026 World Cup, Atlanta will be one of the premier cities hosting the World Cup. And I think it's such an opportunity to put Atlanta on that scale again. Welcome all the visitors from the world. The majority of them will be coming through our airport at some point. And it's going to be great. It's such a great economic and cultural opportunity for the city.
Yeah, and just as someone who's only lived here now for 8 or so years, I mean, how much Atlanta has changed since 1996 is insane.
Oh yeah,
insane. How much Atlanta has changed since 2006 is insane. How much Atlanta has changed since 2016 is insane. So I think that international stage, if ever there was a time, how Atlanta has penetrated pop culture and made its way. If you're a movie or a music, you're coming out of Atlanta right now. It is. You could say it is the pop culture hub of the United States right now, right? And I'm not taking anything away from LA or New York or any of those places. I'm just saying, for whatever reason, and let's be clear, Kemp decided not to shut down during COVID, and some of those things were what helped. The cost of living is what helps. But I think when the world comes to see Atlanta, the world will leave thinking a lot differently than they did in 1996. Yep. I travel a lot internationally. I believe that when people come after this World Cup, when you go internationally and you say Atlanta, people are going to know what you're talking about. Yep. Right now, no one has a clue what you're talking about. If you're not New York, LA, maybe Miami, no one has a clue what you're talking about. Or Vegas, let's just be honest. Yep. No one knows what you're talking about. So I think Atlanta's ready for it. I'm excited for it. Let's dive a little deeper. So, important city. What does that mean? Does that mean media hubs? Does that mean FIFA's going to have infrastructure here? What do you foresee happening? And what do you see Atlanta fans being able to be a part of? One of the big things, and this happened for Super Bowl, just because the World Cup or Super Bowl is coming here doesn't mean casual fans get to be a part of it. They're priced out of it. It's corporate America. Talk about what you think that would look like for Atlanta and Atlantans.
So I think what's really unique about the World Cup is, we're going to be welcoming people from all over the world here. And I see the opportunity for, even if you don't get to go to a game, you're going to be able, we're going to have like the Netherlands or some other country, their like fan HQ here. And, and that's all because of our biggest asset is the airport. And, we also have all the hotels and all that infrastructure supported too. But the airport is definitely going to be the gateway that people coming not just to the city, but to America, they'll at least be coming in through our airport and probably staying a night or two here. Or if we have one of those fan HQs, this is why I think people don't realize how big the World Cup is. It's going to last a month. And, so we might, it's not a 2-week thing. It's not a 1-week thing. There'll be people who are coming to the States or coming to Atlanta that will be here for 4 to 5 weeks. And the economic opportunity of that is just insane.
Yeah, I know for us alone, it's one of those things we look forward to because sports has a very high barrier to entry. Our involvement in those activities, the sports and the World Cup and the Super Bowl create a tremendous revenue opportunity just for us. So we are planning now. We've done Atlanta United tailgates before, and the goal was always when the Gulch went down, which was talked about for years now, finally starting to happen. Then we have a centrally located place. We're doing those things to get ready for the World Cup, to make sure that soccer fans know, because one, I believe that the crossover between soccer and something like college football is much less than people think it is, which means there's opportunity to convert them, right? Because if you actually compare the two closest things I've ever seen are soccer and college football to just the diehard fan bases, the complete body paint to that stuff. Those are the two closest fan bases. So if I can convert some soccer fans, young soccer fans, into college football fans via my station, I've done my job as my evangelist in sports. So we're excited about that. But for us, it's going to be like what you talked about. What can you do ancillarily, if that's a word, to capitalize on it outside the game? Right? Is it international? Maybe it's HQ you talk about it. Maybe the German restaurant downtown, the beer garden, has a spot for German. Like, introduce these different cultures and all that stuff. That is what I am most excited about. I'm excited to see which communities react, because you could also imagine Midtown is one hub, and West Side and East Atlanta, and the Battery.
Yeah, the Battery will be an HQ, right? So imagine if the Japanese team, or any country, pick a country out of the hat, and their HQ is at the Battery. You're going to have thousands of their fans and their media and their bigwigs and everyone literally here for weeks.
And I think it also is going to show what an international city this is. And I don't think it's understood. And look, I'm a Yankee, and as a New Yorker, you don't think anything exists outside of New York. But you get down here, man, there's something in every single corner. The Ethiopian population alone is gigantic. If you drive down 85, that gigantic church when you're past the Pleasant Hills, a Vietnamese church, the populations are massive. So it's going to get a chance to show how big of an international city this is, and I think break a lot of preconceived notions also.
And soccer does that more uniquely than anything else, as far as bringing people together, no matter their background, nationality, whatever it is.
Yeah, I love it. So we got 3 minutes left. So let's finish with this. How's the United going to do this year? What do they have to do to compete again? Because I missed those playoff games. I missed that run. I think the city needs it. And I think one of the problems with Atlanta sports fans is what have you done for me lately? And, had the United been winning, they would have been 80,000 people at that stadium for opening day, not 63,000. So I don't want to see those numbers dwindle. What do we got coming on for the season? What do we got to do to win?
I think you've got the core there. Like I said, there's a lot of turnover. So every year is going to be kind of a roll of the dice. If we can skip the injury bug this year, last year we were absolutely decimated by it. And, not just losing the talent on the field, but when your keeper captain gets hurt and your, American defender who's going to be on the World Cup team and start for the team also gets hurt for the season, that is quite the blow. Joseph was never back. So we just never clicked last year.
Yeah.
So if we have the pieces this year, that if you have that chemistry and you see it click, there's so much parity in MLS. There's that hope we talked about earlier, and hopefully, we're able to. The margins are so fine that to have a successful season is definitely there.
Yeah.
So I have a question for you.
Shoot.
I think that one of the things that makes soccer and college football so parallel is that supporter section.
Yeah.
And the Hawks have a little tiny one.
Yeah. I was actually there on Sunday. It's a section, but you can tell that they were probably giving tickets to be a support section. Like
right.
the Hawks always up there. He's always with them. Like, so you know what I mean?
It's kind of a marketing. It's kind of gimmicky. But imagine having that supporter section for a baseball game.
Yeah.
How awesome would that be? You got one section in the outfield, and you have the people there. They're drinking their drinks. They're having a good time. That, you know, like, I've always wanted that in baseball, because it's kind of like soccer too, where it's like slow during some parts.
If ever there is a time, it is right now. So just for some context, I believe these games will be done in under 2 hours and 15 minutes, a lot of them, because the pitch clock has sped this up so much.
That's beautiful.
So if ever there is a time, baseball's hardest thing is appeasing the old-time fans that want the sanctity of the game with blending with new fans that want it. Now, the Braves have done a better job than anybody in baseball at it. If you look at that stadium, it is so young. But I think if ever there's a time for it to happen, it's now. I think it has to be done delicately, because you're going to still have people in the upper deck that are 90 years old that are keeping score on their old-timey thing, throwing peanuts on the floor. Not saying that I've been one of them at times, but I've done it. But I think that's going to be a problem. And, you know, I think that's a great way to end this, is that crossway between different sports and marketing, and that's what we talk about here on the Marketing Madmen. So you've been listening to the Marketing Madmen. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe for future episodes. Thank you to Matt Stigall, and we will talk again soon. Thank you.
A lifetime of hard work, children laughing in the kitchen, family photos on a restaurant wall, a legacy that lives on. It all comes from the power of a conversation, like the one Tommy Hall had with First Horizon Bank about taking over his father's Charleston-based restaurant business. Now the table is set for a whole new generation. First Horizon Bank. Let's find a way. Go to firsthorizon.com/Tommy. First Horizon Bank, member FDIC.